thanks to Forum EPFL for inviting us. And greetings to Calum. Calum is an old friend and a fellow futurist. He's an amazing science fiction writer. He'll tell you about his latest books. I've just read Pandora's Brain, I think, right? That's called. The latest one, again. It's really great. But he has a bunch of books out that are not just science fiction, also some business books. And Calum and me have been debating for years about the concept of singularity and transhumanism and what it means to be human in a world of technology. And we have contrary opinions on many things, but we also have matching opinions, and we make a good pair debating. So, thanks very much, and without further ado, let me introduce Calum Chace. Maybe, Calum, you can start by giving us a sort of introduction as to what you do and who you are.
Bonjour tout le monde, and thank you very much indeed to the EPFL for inviting Gerd and me to continue our possibly decade-long, very amiable squabble about transhumanism versus progressive humanism. As Gerd said, I'm a science fiction and non-fiction writer, primarily about our future with AI. My core belief is that we are in a period of exponential change, and that very few people have a clue about the importance of that, the amazing changes it's going to lead to, and I'm very optimistic about it. So let's start with a definition of transhumanism. So transhumanists predict and advocate the use of technology to enhance human life, including longevity, mood, and physical and cognitive abilities. Predict and advocate the use of technology to improve human life. I was interested that in the press this morning, there was a report about a woman who's had a brain implant, which it enables her to flick a switch when she gets suicidally depressive. And this is a classic example of the kind of technologies that are enhancing our lives. So I'll dig into various aspects of that, but let's start with a little bit of history. A big part of this is about extending lifespan and health span, and of course that goes back to the beginning of humanity. Really, the Epic of Gilgamesh is perhaps about a powerful leader seeking immortality. But the first use of the word transhumanism came in a paper in 1940 by a Canadian philosopher, who I doubt anybody's heard of, W.D. Lighthall. But it became better known in 1957 when a fairly famous biologist called Julian Huxley wrote an article in which he said the present limitations and miserable frustrations of our existence could in large measure be surmounted. Sounds to me like a good plan. Here are a couple of the key figures in transhumanism in its last decade or so. I'm very fond of this chap at the top left, F.M. Esfandiyari, an Iranian, who said, "I am a 21st century person who was accidentally launched in the 20th century. I have a deep nostalgia for the future." I think that puts it very well. He formally renamed himself FM 2030. And in the 70s, he was having meetings with people about how we could extend lifespan and improve the quality of human life. One of the better known transhumanists around the world is Ray Kurzweil, famous for books like Are We Spiritual Machines and The Singularity is Near. He's been saying for a remarkably long time that we will have what he calls a technological singularity in 2045. He thinks that we will create artificial general intelligence in 2029, and then we will go on to merge with it in about 2045. And he's been saying that for literally decades. He didn't invent the use of the word singularity in this context. It was actually first used by a man called Klaus von Neumann, one of the founding fathers of modern computing. But he probably popularized it more than anybody else. And he has a business partner, Peter Diamandis, who's also very well known, who's the founder of the X Prize Foundation, which is doing remarkable work. You have interesting figures like Natasha and Max Moore, Nick Bostrom, who wrote the seminal book Superintelligence, David Pearce, and my friend David Wood, who runs London Futurists, and the main transhumanist organization has been renamed H+. I think that might give you a clue to the fact that there's a wide range of people who call themselves transhumanists, and they have very different views, politically, particularly. You get people quite far left and people very far right who are transhumanist. I think I would put myself somewhere in the middle. So let's dig into some of the particular aspects that we're talking about. So the technologies that transhumanists look to enhance human life, the big one obviously is artificial intelligence. And that is starting to be and will increasingly be very powerful in creating personalized and precision medicine, including drugs, helping with genetic manipulation and organ replacement. And over the next 20 years or so, we are going to, unless we trip ourselves up with populism or something silly with nuclear weapons, we are going to extend human health span so that a very great number of people live happy and healthy lives into their hundreds. And we might even start to breach what currently looks like the hard stop of 120 years. I'm sure you all know that in 2012, there was a big bang in AI when a branch of statistics called machine learning, and in particular, a subset of that called deep learning, was successfully applied to artificial intelligence. And that is what has made artificial intelligence so obviously powerful. But we are only at the beginning of the growth in the power of AI. So I say that in the definition that transhumanists predict the use of technology to enhance human life. Obviously, the only thing we know about any prediction is that it's wrong. We just don't know which direction it's wrong in. But there are some trends that you can see that unless we trip ourselves up, are going to produce remarkable changes. And one of them is the exponential growth in the power of our computers. And that drives an awful lot else of our rapidly changing lives. So exponential growth is a phrase that you hear a lot, but it's very hard to bear it in mind when you're thinking about the future. So here's an example, an illustration of the power of exponential growth. If you walked 30 steps, 30 ordinary steps, you'd go, let's say, 30 meters. If you could walk 30 exponential steps, your first step would be a meter, your second would be 2, your third would be 4, your fourth step would be 8, and your 30th step would take you to the moon. In fact, that's not quite true. Your 29th step would take you to the moon, and your 30th step would bring you all the way back, because it's a doubling process. Now, if you apply that kind of growth to our compute power, this is what you get. We've had this in the past, and that's why smartphones today have more power than NASA had when they sent Neil Armstrong to the moon. But it's continuing. And so assuming this exponential growth continues, the machines that we have in 10 years from now will be 128 times more powerful than the machines we have today. And the machines we have in 20 years' time will be 8,000 times more powerful than the machines we have today. And then in 30 years' time, they will be a colossal 1,000,000 times more powerful than the machines we have today. How powerful are the machines we have today? Well, GPT-3, which is the cutting-edge natural language processing system developed by OpenAI in California, co-founded by Elon Musk, is able to write articles and poems and letters, and is able to code. Can't write novels yet, I'm glad to say, and it goes wrong a lot, but it's about 1,000th of the power of a human brain based on a very, very crude metric that it uses 170 billion parameters, and we have about 170 trillion synapses, and they are very roughly analogous. I mean, it's a really crude measure, but you could say that as for argument's sake. So when we have machines 1,000,000 times more capable than the machines we have today, they're going to do remarkable things. That is why transhumanists are quite comfortable in predicting very dramatic and very rapid changes in our lives. And it's often said that we are in the fourth industrial revolution. And I think that is profoundly wrong. I think it's very misleading because it leads people to underestimate, to misunderstand the gravity of what's happening. I think we're in the fourth human revolution. The first was about 70,000 years ago, and it was called the cognitive revolution. A lot of debate about when it was, but it was when we acquired sophisticated language and we were able to collaborate in a way that no other species has ever been able to do, which meant that we, fairly puny primates, could kill mammoths and we could build pyramids, and we became the apex predator on the planet. And then when climate change allowed, about 10,000 years ago, different parts of the world, we had the agricultural revolution, which was a really rotten deal for individual humans. It's much better much more fun being a hunter-gatherer than a subsistence farmer, but it was great for the species. It led to the creation of food surpluses and cities, and cities are machines for innovation. So a few thousand years later, we had the Industrial Revolution, started in 1712 in Britain. And we're still in the Industrial Revolution. Many parts of the world are sort of only halfway through it, but the industrialized nations, they're still in it too. But we are also in an entirely new revolution, not the fourth Industrial Revolution, but the Information Revolution, which started around about 1960. This one is going to have even more profound impacts than any of the others. So I strongly denigrate the term, the fourth Industrial Revolution. Transhumanists also advocate the use of technologies to enhance human experience, human lives. We think it's a good thing if we enhance human lives. We don't say that everybody has to have to live longer, to live healthier, to suffer from fewer illnesses, to enhance their physical and cognitive abilities, and to be more cheerful. Not everybody should do it. If you don't want to do it, that's up to you. But we don't think that those of us who want to should be prevented from it. Now, a very important thing to say is that transhumanists are not blind to the potential downsides. Any technology has potential downsides. Fire can keep you alive. It can warm you. It can also kill you. Nuclear power obviously has positive and negative sides. So do hammers. Any technology has a positive and a negative side. There are always ethical considerations about how you roll them out. But if you hold up the introduction of, say, medical therapies for years and years and years, lots of people will die. And many transhumanists would argue against that. In fact, we do think that there's a moral obligation to reduce suffering if possible. And some of the things that transhumanists want to see, such as longer health spans, are necessary for society. In 2013, the US national debt was about 10 trillion. Today, it's about 30 trillion. And in 2026, it'll be about 50 trillion. That is 50% of world GDP. It's not sustainable. We don't know when it becomes a crisis, but it will become a crisis. A lot of that money is spent on healthcare, and we could spend a lot less if we all lived healthier lives for longer. And the good news is that is happening. Longevity, one of the key elements of transhumanism, is an area where a great deal more investment is going in now than any time in the past. There's a new fund just got launched a few days ago called the Longevity Vision Fund, which is seeking to provide $1 billion to research funds, which are specifically to research initiatives which were specifically targeting extending health span and indeed extending lifespan. Until quite recently, aging was not regarded as a treatable disease or problem by the medical establishment, and that is finally changing. So I've got a couple of minutes in which I want to just address one or two of the critiques that people throw at transhumanism. Firstly, they say it's playing God and it's not natural. Well, we've always been transhumanists in a sense. I wear glasses. I'm sure some of the people in the audience wear glasses, although you're obviously a lot younger than me. And people are wearing cochlear implants. We have photocorrectomy, which is surgery to improve our lenses. People use Viagra, they use Botox, they use plastic surgery. We have Paralympians. We enhance our cognitive and physical abilities with technology all the time. It's what we do, and we shouldn't stop doing it just because we're getting better and better technologies. If God wanted us not to use these technologies, he, she, or it wouldn't have given them to us. There's another critique which says that death gives meaning to life. And personally, I think this is nonsense. I think it's nonsense for two reasons. Firstly, I don't get any meaning from death, and I don't know anybody who does. I get my meaning from my friends, my family, my projects, my hobbies, my work. And I don't spend any time thinking about death and thinking, oh, well, because I'm going to die in X number of years, I'm going to enjoy today. In fact, the great majority of us think very little about death. We avoid thinking about death. We don't take it seriously because it's such a nasty fact of life at the moment that we're going to lose this wonderful thing we call life. We just ignore it. And that's evidenced by the fact that we don't spend the time to think properly about our funeral arrangements, most of us. So I think it's just not true that death gives meaning to life. And with that, I think I will wrap up with this comment. I don't believe that technology is taking us to dystopia. Hollywood likes to believe that because it makes a better story. I also don't think it's taking us to utopia. Utopia is A, boring, and B, impossible. I think we should aim at protopia. Protopia is a word invented by Kevin Kelly, actually, the founder of Wired magazine. And it means a world in which everything is really, really good. And it just keeps getting better. Thank you for your attention.
Wow, Calum, well, thanks very much. That was great. It was a great overview of all the issues. So I'm going to launch into my part now. It will be a little bit longer, I'm afraid, but I'm sure you're used to that one. So welcome again, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. So I'm going to speak to you about this today. Just like utopia, which I like the term, I am proposing a new variation on the transhumanism. I call it progressive humanism. And of course it has been used before, you know, most of these things have been used before. But basically my position on this is that we should use technology to do great things, as much as Calum is suggesting, but we should not use technology to fundamentally change us in such a way that we're no longer human. As we're going on this transition here, you know, you can see that everywhere. This is one of my favorite graphs. I'm going to take myself out here for a second, right? Moving towards a new place to where we are no longer, some people would say limited by our own biology. Right? And basically what's happening here is that we have a great quote here from Max Moore that I found yesterday, when he says, Mother Nature, we are grateful for what you have made us. No doubt you made the best intent. However, we must say that they have in many ways done a poor job with the human condition. That's Max Moore in his manifesto, the Transhumanist Manifesto. And right underneath that, the philosophy that accepts death must itself be considered dead. This is Alan Harrington, going to what Calum just said a little bit earlier. So the philosophy here is to do away with death and to fix the flaws of nature and to reprogram humans, kind of like this. I love this picture. I've been using it for a decade. To where we can become superhuman or become as God. You know, I don't believe in God. We can discuss that later, but I'm not religious in that sense. But this is kind of the intent, right? Like we can go to a place that is completely different than before. We can become superhuman. We can go science fiction to science fact. Again, one of my favorite movies, Blade Runner. And that's really what's happening around us. And we look at all these trends, augmented reality, virtual reality, bioengineering, Zuckerberg's amazing metaverse. I would not trust Zuck on this very much. But basically all that stuff is leading us to a place to where we can safely say, well, our future is no longer limited by what is possible. That's maybe the next 10 years. After that, no. By what we want, right? There's a key question. It's really changing a lot as technology is becoming exponentially fast, as Calum was explaining. I think it's also converging the industries. For example, pharma, medical, life science, and technology. And it's adding combinatory products. Things are completely different than at any time before. For example, the self-driving car, the electric car, and so on. And basically what's happening here is now we're finding ourselves in a place where we have to decide what we want to be, because it's no longer just this ominous digital transformation, the moneymaker, for industries and companies. It is a social transformation that's going on right now, also because of the COVID crisis. And finally, it's a human transformation. And that is where the big question lies. So if we progress in the next 10 years towards the human transformation, the question is going to be quite simple, no longer about, what is possible in the future, or how do we do this, how much does it cost, and so on. But what kind of future do we want our children to have, our grandchildren to have? And do we want a future that is based on machine logic or governed by machines? Do we want a future that's based on human logic? Many people say human logic is flawed and we're no good anyway. Great philosophical debate about whether humans are basically bad or good. We'll discuss shortly later. But let me start here with one of the key statements of transhumanism and also of the singularity, is that organisms, people, us, right? We are essentially data. We're algorithms. Harari says that in his books. That's basically where we're going to become technology, right? And a great quote here by Ray Kurzweil, who says, the essential thing is to recognize that consciousness is a biological process. And I don't agree with that at all. I think it may be biological in the sense of ultimately us discovering how it works, but not in the sense of current algorithms. The current algorithms are not intelligent, they're not biological, they are not human, and we are certainly not just data, but key point for discuss for later. But this kind of concept I call reductionism. And this is one of my heavy complaints for transhumanists, is to reduce the world to technology and data, information, and science ultimately, and say that's it, right? That's what we can explain, and we're just like machines. To me, that's a ridiculous concept. And this idea of reductionism has this kind of funnel effect, right, that we are seeing now, for example, in social media. All we have to do is stick in our damn human stuff, the stuff that makes us weak, motivation, free will, intuition, imagination. And like Facebook, we can suck that up into a new digital environment where out comes a nice clean feed, right? That's reductionism. Data, algorithms, automation, efficiency, optimization, and we can function well. That is the concept of reductionism, and that is what I'm worried about when I think about transhumanism, that it will take out the things that make us human, mystery, serendipity, discovery, and that's also the logic behind dataism. I think also coined by Harari, Yuval Harari, basically believing that data is it, and that we have to trust data. Now here I want to play a short clip by the former CEO of IBM, Ginny Rometty, talking about IBM Watson, or the former IBM Watson, because both have been kind of defunct, right? Both her and the Watson project is going in a different direction. However, it is valuable. So I'll play the clip for you so you can enjoy it.
This is a world that's going to solve so many problems that aren't solved. And so, as I always say, we'll solve the unsolvable, like healthcare, like risk, like food safety. And on the other side, everyday life. In fact, I've really been bold. I think in the next 5 years, you'll use this kind of technology to make almost any important decision. And it could be
yeah, interesting, right? Solve the unsolvable. I mean, this is a grand dream of humanity, right? We can solve all that stuff, and technology solves every single problem. David Pearce, leader, transhumanist leader, great quote here. He calls it the hedonistic imperative. Hedonism means, kind of a little bit of happiness, satisfying ourselves. It outlines how genetic engineering and nanotechnology will abolish suffering. That's the idea. Right? And then he says, it's instrumentally rational and ethically mandatory to do this. And then he says, then we're going to enter the state of supreme well-being, become the genetically pre-programmed norm. That sounds all like really scary. And I wonder where this is going. I know where it's going. This idea that technology will save us. We can't save ourselves. We're too stupid. We're too evil. We're not paying enough attention. We're not collaborating. So technology can do this. Peter Diamandis, another one of the singularity leaders, I love his books, but this is a statement that really makes me wonder, right? As we begin to liberate our thoughts, our memes, our consciousness from the biological constraints that we presently have, it will allow us to evolve faster and faster. Now that is a typical Silicon Valley mantra, right? We have to go faster, and on top of it, we have to make a lot more money. That is imperative, of course, in the culture of Silicon Valley. And here's the best one, right? By the Transhumanism Handbook, Newton Lee, who says transhumanism will save democracy from device, right? We're going to automate democracy, and we're going to basically get a machine in charge because, again, we're too stupid, right? Technology will save the day and humans have to get out of the way. I think that's a totally flawed assumption, and I'm willing to really dive into this idea of saying, okay, let's have a president that's an AI. Would be better than a human because humans are flawed, and of course we've seen many flawed humans in the last 18 months, but also a couple of good ones. And then this idea of saying, okay, let's put an AI there that knows everything, that is basically everywhere, that in the end knows everyone, that can do everything, right? And here's my answer: there's purely intelligent creatures, whether they're man or machine, are a detriment to society. We need more than intelligence. It's not enough to be intelligent, and I think we've seen how some really intelligent people in the past have been the detriment of society. My belief really is that machines are binary until we get to quantum computing, maybe. So they know zeros and ones. They don't know anything in between. Humans do. We are very good at reading between the lines because we are what I call multinary, right? We are at the place to where we can look at overriding issues, purpose, passion, critical thinking. Maybe machines will learn that eventually, but should they? At this point, they could become generally intelligent, AGI, and that is a real issue in my book, right? Because we still have the Moravec paradox. This is Austrian-American researcher. I think he's still alive and doing great work. He says whatever is very simple for a human is very hard for a computer, and vice versa. And I think that's going to remain the cornerstone of artificial intelligence. It should remain the cornerstone. We don't want machines to do what humans are doing. As Stuart Russell, UC Berkeley professor, who wrote a great book called Human Compatible on AI, as he likes to say, we should be looking for competence in machines, not consciousness. Yeah, there is a difference. Again, subject to debate for later. Right? Here, great clip again from the second Blade Runner, right, where he talks to his fake girlfriend, and she can be amazing. Obviously, she's like a hologram, right? And then he gets a super hologram. In the end, he realizes it rains, the power goes out, and she's gone, right? He's very depressed. So here's the bottom line on what we see around us. Technology is very good at giving us what we want, but not so good at giving us what we need. Because technology doesn't do that. And this is why I don't want too much technology pretending to give us what we need. I think it's a giant business model issue, right? It's something that obviously going to make money. And now we have this pyramid of work that's changing as a result of what technology does, because technology is capable of intellectual knowledge and logic. Machine learning, deep learning, clearly that is happening. Understanding language, that's machine turf now. And here is the human turf, right? And this is what we have to focus on in the future when we think about what we want to be, apart from technology. HI is on a different level than AI, and that's the way that it could possibly collaborate. So I'm wondering, and I will debate it with Calum a little bit later, is this just a giant business idea? The biggest business idea ever around the world is to substitute technology, take out the humans, and create a giant business around it. You know this clip, and I think I'll play it so you can remind yourself.
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto.
Yeah, commerce, right? Commerce, more human than human, that's the goal. And we've reached that goal here, right? We have, of course, all these amazing companies here, making so much money. The tech giants have been exploding in value in the COVID crisis. And if commerce is the goal, I think we reached this, but it shouldn't be the goal for us, period. And I think Tyrell, the Blade Runner, first Blade Runner tycoon, Elon Musk is kind of like the next Tyrell. And that kind of worries me.
Another question from Twitter. Will you be able to save and replay memories in the future?
Yes, I think in the future you will be able to save and replay memories. This is obviously sounding increasingly like a Black Mirror episode.
Yeah, Elon, pretty amazing. Yeah, can we use that to upload our thoughts? Of course we can. Imagine what kind of business that would be. We're not far away from Black Mirror and those discussions. So we're heading towards huge ethical challenges on this, okay? This is the challenge. Technology is great, it does great things, but it doesn't have ethics. It doesn't understand values. It has no ethics, and it shouldn't have ethics. And this is what's greatly worrying me about transhumanism, getting too close to technology that doesn't give a damn on what we're all about. As Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, likes to say, technology can do great things, but it doesn't want to do great things. It doesn't want anything. So who's going to want it then? Who is in charge? You've seen the film The Social Dilemma. And that is, I mean, social media right now, and Facebook in particular, is the biggest menace to democracy that we can imagine. And there have been countless articles in the last couple of days, despite the outage, of course, right? Ethics is having the power to do something, knowing the difference, and knowing what is the right thing to do. And so many technology companies already don't know what is the right thing to do. And of course, it's hard to know what is the right thing to do. But would a machine know that? And who's in charge, right? And when we think about the right thing to do, here's a paralyzed man who can walk again using an exoskeleton, to go back to Calum's example of the eyeglasses and, of course, the cochlear implants. Amazing, that we should definitely do that. But here's a guy who's taken that same principle, her, H-E-R-R, right? And he's building prostheses for people to actually replace their legs. He hasn't really propagated that very much yet, but that's the concept, right? How would you react if somebody says, I have $2 million, I want better legs for running? Is that okay? And how do you feel about that? Would it just be for the rich? Again, Elon, with his Neuralink project, right, basically putting electrodes into the human brain to allow us to upload to the internet. Is that science fiction? Pretty much. Is it a good idea? No. I call that too much of a good thing. Can be a very bad thing. And I think that's definitely too much of a good thing. So let me do some bottom lines and then we'll have a debate, okay? So bottom line first, this is the kind of question we should ask ourselves. What kind of future do you want? And what does it mean for policy and politics and decision making and wisdom, right? I present progressive humanism. The idea of using technology and on top of that, all the things that make us human to maintain them and to protect them. Ethics, values, mystery, compassion, and all the other stuff that we talk about all the time. Purpose, passion, imagination. Right? And on top of that, I propose that we should, of course, not make it human-centric in the sense that all that matters is humans. We should take a wider view, and I call that people, planet, purpose, and prosperity. And that includes everything on the agenda. Progressive humanism would use technology to go further. I call it, basically awesome humans on top of amazing technology. And I believe we should not go into the future by having the sort of worrisome approach that many have in Europe, or the totally super excited approach that many people have in China without questioning things. We should not go with fear, but not with stupidity either. And make decisions that impact millions of people, because the future isn't black or white between humans and machines. It's both, right? There's no such thing as a simple answer. We have to be proactive sometimes and courageous and take a risk. And then we have to also have respect and have caution and wisdom. And who decides this? And this is the biggest question. How do we actually do this? And one of my principles I set forth in my book, Technology vs. Humanity, says that the more that we connect, the more we must protect what makes us human. And protect in a wise way, not overprotect in the sense of keeping stuff back. That is not going to happen, right? But let's not leave those decisions of that handshake between humans and machines, let's not leave that to big tech. That's what we are currently doing. That is a very bad idea. That ends up being another Facebook times 1,000 in the near future when we trust our human intelligence to machines. So bottom line on this is, technology is a present, we should accept it, we should use it, but when we use it too much, it turns into a bomb. It can turn into a bomb, so we're going to need regulation on this, like artificial general intelligence. We're going to need what I call the Digital Ethics Council, the Council of the Wise People, Aristotle and others. And it's very, very important. Aristotle once said, we think too much about the means of how we get there, but we don't think enough about the end, the destination that we want to get to. So I think a council like this would be a great idea, because in the end, I think we must maintain the right to be only human, right? To be unaugmented, not to have to go along just like we are being forced today to carry a mobile phone, which is a marginal concern, really. But the right to remain unaugmented, that is also at risk when we talk about transhumanism. Bottom line is, as I say in my book, we need to embrace technology, but not become technology. And there's a very big difference. So I want to thank you very much for listening. I made a film recently called The Good Future, and that outlines a few more things. It's thegoodfuturefilm.com, and of course there's my book that you may know. Let's start the debate.
I think you set up an Aunt Sally of transhumanism. I think you set up a sort of a straw man version of it, and then you attack it. You suggest that transhumanists are somehow unemotional, almost unconscious, interested only in profit and rational superiority, and they have no imagination, they have no flair, and I don't think any of those things are true. I think transhumanists are great people because they're very optimistic. They believe in a brighter, better future because of technology. They look back at the last 300 years of humanity and see that most of the things that the things that make modern life great, the fact that we don't all die before we're 5, the fact that, you know, such a high proportion of women don't die in childbirth, the fact that many of us can read and write, most of us don't smoke these days, etc., etc. These things have all happened in the last 300 years. And guess what? It's because of technology that's happened. And also because of capitalism. You and I will never agree about this. I think capitalism is the best system we have ever invented to allocate scarce resources. And we project it forwards, and it's not unreasonable to think that technology will continue to improve our lives and make them much, much better. So transhumanists are very optimistic. Transhumanists have more fun. So I think you set up an Aunt Sally.
Let's take it one argument at a time. First, of course, I've met many of the transhumanists and I've done many events, and I know that they're good people. It's not about the people themselves. I think the concept, right, of saying we're going to alleviate human suffering by reprogramming and basically finding ways to cut away all that suffering pieces but keep the rest. Right? Marshall McLuhan once said, when we extend humans, right, we also amputate things. And that is so true for television, is true for the mobile phone. And the problem is not with the amputation period. If something is sick, of course, you may have to amputate, right? But that's not the principal problem, but how much and how often. And I think the dangerous precedent I see with transhumanism is here to say, we can solve all of that just by doing away with the stuff we no longer need, like an appendix. You know, and to me, that is a great reduction.
The woman who was reported in the papers today, who's had a neural implant, which when she activates it, it removes her suicidal thoughts. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
You know, in principle, I think that anything that helps people to deal with their actual issues, like, you know, you're paralyzed, you get an exoskeleton, and you train for 2 years, and I think this is all good. And fighting cancer by genetic engineering, also good, right? But taking the same technology and saying, okay, let me see, I have this issue with, you know, I don't feel joyous enough, or I can't find happiness, so I'm going to engineer it one way or the other. You know, basically taking it one step further. Everybody wants to be happy, so you can call that sickness or not, whatever, you know, not being happy. But, you know, I think there's a cutoff at a certain point where it's frivolous.
And who should make the decision about where that cutoff is?
Yeah, but that's exactly a very difficult question.
So here's a proposal. Here's a proposal. Yeah. That woman who's had that implant, I think you and I would both agree that it's perfectly reasonable that she should have it, because if she doesn't have it, sooner or later she's going to kill herself, and she's going to have a ton of misery in the meantime. So we mostly agree that that's a good thing. Now, unless you can demonstrate harm, that to me that's the principle. Unless you can demonstrate harm, if somebody wants to augment themselves, they should be allowed to.
But Calum, listen, you're confusing two different things. Sickness, issues, problems, diseases, and technological solutions to me are perfectly fine if we can find a way not to have them grow into other things like military use and so on. That's fine. But the idea of saying that this woman may kill herself and that we prevent that from happening, and also going further of saying that we use all these technologies to essentially prohibit and prevent all of it, then we not only have the question of it being affordable, but also a question of how will the other ones that don't do this compete? Right?
So why would you assume that the other ones wouldn't have it? The history of technology over and over and over again is that you start with a very expensive version, which is only available to rich people, and it doesn't work very well. Rich people are the guinea pigs, and then the producers go up the learning curve and make a version which is available to everybody. The classic example is the smartphone, first introduced in as recently as 2007, was it, or 2008? And now it's available all over the world. You know, billions and billions of people have got these things, which initially were just incredibly expensive playthings for rich people. That's what happens with technology. Yeah, and the reason why it happens is very simple. If you make something that's available to billions of people as a company, you make a lot more money than if you make a diamond encrusted thing that is only available to Larry Page and Jeff Bezos.
But two things about that. First, of course, technology is a godsend in that regard, free phone calls and all that stuff. But, you know, of course, that there are many, many issues related to the mobile phone and overuse of the mobile phone and Instagram loneliness and teenagers killing themselves on social networks and manipulation and all that stuff that comes with the mobile phone, right? What we've done so far is we've said, okay, this is great and we'll make money with this. And of course, it's helping GDP and so on. But the externalities, the consequences of this overconnectivity and what we have right now, somebody else will take care of it. Right? This is what we've done so far. And the mobile phone is harmless in that sense that it's outside of me. Right? When it's inside of me, augmented reality glasses, virtual reality, brain-computer interfaces, right? A whole different game, even when it's free. Because in the end, you know, it's not like the vaccine where we can say, okay, it is not really voluntary anymore to take the vaccine or not. You know, in theory it is, but in reality it's not. And that's because it's existential, right? And we're getting everybody to do this. We want to solve the problem. This is different. This is optional, right? Enhancing. And so the optional thing to make the optional the new normal just because of better performance. I think if we can solve cancer and we have the idea of saying we analyze your genome and you get predictive analytics and so on, that seems like a good thing, right? But that should be available to everybody, and also it should be still optional to want to know if you're going to do this or not.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that there should be a sort of like a panel of wise people, men and women, who would decide whether a technology is being used to cure an ill, in which case good. But if it's used to augment and improve what is already some sort of a baseline of normality, not good. And I completely disagree with that. I think if you had a choice, say you could have a neural implant, which took somebody's life experience from being humdrum and okay, but boring, to being full of delight and full of potential and love and joy. First, I don't think people should be stopped from having that implant.
Well, that's already a bad assumption. I don't think technology can do that. Happiness doesn't exist in an implant or in the cloud or on the screen. It's something that we must find for ourselves as we are now. If you're not happy, it has thousands of reasons, but I can make a chemical happiness. That's called a drug, right? And I can produce that, and people do that. Is it okay? Should we make that normal? No, we should not. And I think that is basically a choice that people make if they want to have a drug-induced or implant-induced happiness. I think that whole assumption is wrong, that technology
So you do think people should be able to take a drug if it makes them happy?
Let's say, relatively speaking, I think it should not be illegal in the sense of like, you know, illegal to kill somebody or so. But, you know, we have rules on all these things like drugs, alcohol, beer, smoking, and most people know how to handle it, right? But when something becomes really powerful, like just think for a second, right? If your augmented reality glasses that Apple is working on, or the virtual reality from Facebook, if that becomes totally cheap, available every time except for when they're down, you know, then I may feel like I'm kind of off without it, right? And what kind of society would we create there?
Well, I would feel very off if I don't have electricity, running water, and above all, internet connection.
But that's different.
I am reliant on technology. We all are. Most of us can't find our way from A to B because we got used to using smart maps. And I
like
think
I
that's
said
a
earlier,
perfectly acceptable price.
yeah, it's not a black or white question. Water, electricity, and cholesterol pills or whatever, that is one level, but this level is exponentially further along. And I've said many times before, what is okay exponentially on the lower part of the scale, 2, 3, 8, and so on, may be completely off at 256 because of all of the amplifying of effects. Right? And for example, you can say 300 million people are taking diabetes medicine, right? And we can solve that with technology, some way or the other. Okay, but then the next issue of saying, okay, now we have 1 million people getting a genetic engineering fix because that may prevent diabetes, that's another thing altogether, exponentially different.
And do you think that would be a bad thing?
I'm not necessarily saying it would be a bad thing. I think we have to be careful about where that takes us and what it means. And also, most importantly, what we have right now in the transhumanism debate is clearly the most expensive things, and they will get cheaper. But should everybody be able to do cryonics?
Yes.
And kind of,
Why not?
Yes. Yeah. No, I think we have more important problems to fix than everybody trying to extend their
arguably
life.
not. I mean, at the moment, 150,000 people die of age every day around the world. That's a catastrophe. If we could put those people on ice and bring them back in some decades in the future when the technology is available, that's a good thing. I mean, we've got to deal with whether the planet can sustain us, and there's all sorts of interesting questions about that. But in principle, stopping death is just a good thing, Gerd.
I think it can be a good thing, not in all cases. I mean, for example, to make it a default that everybody gets cryonic, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Right?
The government, if not, who gets to choose who lives and dies?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult decision, but we've made that decision in many other fields. For example, nuclear energy, we've made that decision, what is okay and what's not okay. And there are many overlapping areas, and we have lots of issues with that. But we have a nuclear non-proliferation treaty. I think we need an artificial general intelligence non-proliferation treaty, which maybe it's too late, I don't know. But we need an agreement of how far do we go and what is ultimately not okay anymore. For example, the concept, AGI, one thing, but the other one is to say, I'm going to cut my legs off to get new ones because I can run quicker. Well, if people want to do that, I would consider that, akin to a crime, parenthesis. People could still do that just like they do now. But it shouldn't just be normal. I mean, I think that's a perversion.
Well, let's take that example. It's a good example. If somebody produced a technology which was proven to my satisfaction that it couldn't cause me any harm, and it gave me a pair of legs which enabled me to jump over tall buildings, and also, because it would be easy to replace the parts, nothing would go wrong with these legs, and I could afford it, I would do it. And you know what? I think an awful lot of people would. Initially, I think there'd be enormous resistance to it. The Daily Mail would have a campaign arguing against it. The Daily Mail, for those of you students in Switzerland who don't know, is an appalling thing that people call a newspaper here. But once people got used to the idea, as with smartphones, when smartphones came out, people thought, oh, these things are stupid toys for yuppies. And look at these pretentious people who are wandering around with it. And now everybody's got one. I think in a matter of just a few years, everybody would want these wonderful legs. And why should we not have them? I think you have to prove harm. If you can't prove harm, let people augment their lives.
I think there's plenty. I mean, there's piles of harm here, right? For example, the inequality that occurs at least in the beginning of the curve until everybody can have those fabulous legs, right? And then the distortion of humanity that happens by saying, okay, what else am I going to be doing to improve my happiness and and it's kind of a never-ending thing. And where do we end up? We're ending up becoming machines, because it would be feasible, right? And I think that's in principle a very bad decision.
Okay, so this takes us on to another subject which we've discussed before, which I think we ought to cover before we open it up to the floor, which is this question of humanness and whether being human is in some way sacrosanct and we should protect it. There is a difficulty in defining what humanness is. I personally have a fairly simple definition of humanness. A human is a biological entity which can create other humans in the traditional manner. That's the traditional definition of a species. And frankly, being human does not seem to me to be the most important aspect of us. What seems to me to be the most important aspect of me, you, and everybody else I know is our consciousness. And as you rightly say, machines at the moment don't have consciousness, but interestingly, they may well in the future. But our consciousness is the most important thing. Now, if somebody said to me, Calum, I can give you this technology, you will live inside a robot or you will live in a virtual world, and you will no longer be able to create humans in the traditional way. You won't have the human body, which enables you to call yourself human in that sense, but you will have 1,000,000 times the intelligence you have now. You'll have 1,000,000 times the emotional range that you have now. You'll be able to love your partner 1,000,000 times more powerfully, 1,000,000 times more joyfully. I wouldn't say no.
It sounds to me a little bit like Mark Zuckerberg saying when you're on Facebook, you can make thousands of new friends, and look how that has turned out.
Somehow I don't think Mark Zuckerberg makes my life 1,000,000 times more powerful.
Yeah, no. I mean, these are promises, right? I don't believe those promises. I'm sorry. I just, I think it does come down to what you believe to be possible, what you believe to be true, and what you believe to be desirable, And like I said before, for my own life, I'd rather be more human than to be faster or quicker or wiser.
What do you mean by being more human?
Well, being more human in the sense of having more empathy, compassion, understanding, emotions.
I don't think that's human. That's extraordinarily anthropocentric to think that humans are the sole possessors of empathy. I bet, if there are other species around the universe, they probably take a serious objection to that.
Let me give a final comment. I think that's a very good fit. I always say the future is better than we think, but we have to govern it wisely.